Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Real Conversations about Aging Parents. I have a special guest with me, Frances Reeves. She is an accomplished attorney and author and spending some time with us today to talk about a variety of topics. Hi, Frances. How are you?
I'm great, Rebecca. How are you?
Excellent. I'm enjoying getting to know you so far, and it sounds like you're going to plan my next South American trip, so that's good.
Yes, I'm excited.
So tell my audience just a little bit about yourself, like your background, what you're passionate about.
Well, my passion is some people call them seniors. I tend to call them elders, but that's my passion and getting them recognized. Even though I'm a lawyer and an author, I wrote the book because I was inspired by my parents' last 3 years in life and how hard it was for them because no one knew who or what to call. So, and how badly they were treated and how many people they had to how many different people they had to go see. And, my dad was 90, my mom was 84 with dementia. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I sometimes get on a soapbox. And as I told you in our pre-podcast remarks, if I start getting on that soapbox, you're allowed to stop me. But that is passion.
Well, tell me, I always find it interesting. People come to this usually through their own experience or journey. You already mentioned your parents. Can you just give me kind of a thumbnail sketch of what the sequence was? Like, I always ask people, when did you go from everything seems fine to I think this needs some more attention? Like, what do you remember from that time frame?
Well, my brother and I were the main folks here. We have a sister, but she lived in Arizona and had some other things going on.
And
So
you're in Florida. So when you say your
I'm in
brother,
Florida
yeah.
and he was
Okay.
in Atlanta, and mom and dad were in Houston.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, no, no, that's the way the family is. So,
Yeah.
basically what happened was Matt Matt is my brother. Matt and I went about once a I realized something was going on. And so I would go about once a month to visit them when they were in Houston. And as a consequence, and dad hid mom's dementia, but I should have picked it up sooner than I did because I'd get there and mom is an honors or summa, one of those laude graduates of American University. And all of a sudden she started watching ponies going around a track, the ponies that had a little carriage behind them. And I'm like, what is this about? And dad said, I don't know, she just really likes them. But it turns out mom was sundowning. She was doing a whole lot of things. We just didn't know about it. And then
Why do you think that is? Why do you think he wanted to hide that?
exactly. That was exactly what I asked him, and he said, and this is so upsetting, he said, "Well, I didn't wanna worry you kids." Worry us? Dad, I still remember saying, "That's what we're here for. That's why you." I mean, it is we want to be a part of this for you because as I'm sure other folks you've had on this podcast have discussed, often the caretaker is the one who dies first from the stress of caretaking. And dad was 6 years older, and he was fine. Cognitively, he was fine. And he didn't really wanna move, he kept saying, "I don't wanna move, I don't wanna move." So then dad had a 90th birthday party that my brother and I planned. Now, I would go in monthly, my brother and I would go in quarterly. And the truth of the matter is, we kinda let dad get away with it. And I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing.
What do you mean by that? You mean that you let him
We
take
let
care of
him
her when you knew
say,
it was
"Oh, no, I'm fine, I'm fine."
oh, him say he was okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna say it was about 6 or 7 months before his birthday. Matt and I both insisted that they had long-term care, that he gets someone coming in 5 days a week or 3 days a week or whatever, so he could just at least take some time off. He wasn't cooking breakfast, he wasn't doing lunch, so he agreed to that. Then we and This is the other thing that happens. Your caretakers leave. They find a better deal, so I mean, when you're working through an agency, it's really hard. And finally, the agency couldn't find someone that really connected with mom until they sent one of their own office people there, and she and mom connected, and so she started coming 3 times a week. Lovely, lovely young lady. And so now it's time for Dad's 90th birthday, and we're having a semi-family reunion. This is in Texas. He's from Texas. A lot of folks are coming in, et cetera, et cetera. And Mother, like most dementia people, bucked up for the party, when he talked about the woman who'd been there forever, which at that point it was, they'd been married, I think, 60 years. So when he talked about her, she stood up and waved and said hello. She was short. Dad was 6'2", she was 5'2". But then the next day, we're having a brunch at our house, and Mom comes over to me. She called me Franny, and she goes, "Franny, I'm really ready to go home now," except we were home. We were in her house. And I thought, "Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, there's really something wrong here." And my brother and I flew into action because we had to have them either in Miami or in Atlanta where my brother lived. And so we went I went up to Atlanta, we found a place for them, got them into that place, and it was very apparent mom I mean, first of all, when you move old people, it's hard enough. It's very hard, because they have to learn a new place. I mean, they'd been there for 30 years, and again, you question, "Did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing?" But mom could no longer live with dad, and we had to find another place for her.
Can I step back on 2 of those I have 2 questions about that. The first question I have is you mentioned that they have long-term you mean long-term care insurance, is that what you meant by that?
Exactly, long-term
Can you
care.
talk just a little bit about when they acquired that and how much it was costing them?
Well, they acquired it early on, probably when they were in their 60s. Dad was an insurance guy, had insurance forever.
Oh, okay.
And so they acquired it probably in his 60s. And he had for mom, because he just assumed she would live longer, he had it was a 2-year policy, and he had an inflation waiver on mom's. And for himself, he also took a 2-year policy with no inflation waiver. So and it didn't cost that much. I mean, now long-term care insurance is a lot more expensive, but even when I took it, I wanna say it was probably 12 years ago. Even when I took it, I mean, it cost me some money on an annual basis, but, it's under four $4,000, but now you really can't touch that for
I mean, under
4,000.
4,000 per year as a premium?
Yeah, as a
Did y'all
premium.
have trouble executing the use of long-term care? Because I've had some people that have told me they thought they bought good insurance, and when it kinda push came to shove and they needed it, that it was a lot more complicated or difficult. Did you guys have any difficulty actually utilizing it?
Well, not only did we have difficulty utilizing it, which we did, we then had difficulty because they cut off moms early. And this is now part of my practice is helping people if with long-term care insurance actually get the insurance. Insurance by its very nature, they never wanna give it to you. I can't remember a time that insurance says, "Oh, yeah, let me write that check."
Right.
They do that. And here's what happened with moms. They counted wrong, which I'm sure happens all the time. They counted wrong, and they all of a sudden, they cut her off without telling us, without anything, right? So I wrote a letter to the insurance company, which, I mean, it was like it wasn't Transamerica. but it was like a Transamerica. We're not talking some fly-by-night insurance company. So I then said to, I wrote a letter and then I joined Premium LinkedIn, and anyone who had a senior VP title or higher received that letter. There are several, there's a CEO of this group, a CEO of that group. And do you know, I got a call within 24 hours. Then, then he said, all right, well, I'll look into it. And what a surprise, I was right. Now I'm a lawyer, so of course I could do this, right? And he said, yeah, okay. And this is where I made my mistake. He said, this is like a week later. He says, well, how much do you think all this is worth? And I just wanted to make mom and dad and my brother and I whole. Stupid me. And I told him $15,000. And do you know, I had the check like within 2 days, which means I asked
Oh
for
my
way
gosh.
too little, right? But this is how Parent Your Parents got started. And this is how I went on this journey. He says to me, we're on a first name basis. He was a very nice man. He said to me, Frances, this never happens. And I'm like, yeah, what never
Right.
happens is that you're found out. And if mom and dad hadn't had an attorney for a daughter, I have no idea where they would be today.
And when you say they miscounted, you mean that she was eligible for
Number of
Medicaid?
days. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
2 years, 365 times 2. You know what I'm saying? So they
Oh,
miscounted, which meant to figure all this out, guess who had to count the 2 years
right.
worth of days? Yeah.
And funny how the error was in their favor,
Ah,
you know,
ah.
right?
Oh, surprise. No.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no one on your parents' side. I fired their doctor, which meant firing their insurance company. And when the insurance company asked why I chose someone else, I said, because you did not give good medical care. I mean, the bottom line here is the insurance companies run this. My husband has Alzheimer's. I cannot tell you what it took to get him into rehab. I mean, and you have to know the tricks of the trade. It's ridiculous. But
Well, I always tell people I'm a physician in rehab, so it is hard sometimes to get people into rehab, and I always tell them it's meant to be hard. Because
Mhm.
that the more barriers and the more paperwork and the more unreturned phone calls, then the less care that's being provided. Like that, I think people get frustrated thinking it's them or something has gone wrong, or maybe they just don't have the right context. And the truth is, especially when it comes to insurance companies, it does not behoove them to have excellent, accessible care that makes complete sense, right? I mean, you get an explanation of benefits and the envelope is like a half inch thick, it's just so hard to read sometimes, like,
Not
this doesn't make any sense. So I empathize with you. So I appreciate and I think I wanna do a whole podcast episode eventually on long-term care insurance, but I wanted to
I'm
talk about
happy
you
to
kinda
help.
went from how your parents got from Houston to Atlanta. What was that conversation like? How did that
Mm,
happen?
it took dad a long time. Not a long time. I mean, he was angry. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to die in his house. Now, the only good news was their two couple best friends were also moving to become closer to their families. So that helped a little bit. But, you know, and I'm sure this happens with everyone. Dad wasn't, he was the man of the house. He didn't need his daughter, the quote unquote apple of his eye, as I reminded him. Um, he didn't need his daughter telling him what to do. He knew how to take care of mom. And here's what I noticed, which has been helpful with me and my husband. What I noticed was that once we got mom in her own space, At first, dad went every day because that's what he was used to, you know. Then he would go like 2 or 3 times a week. And when she outlived her long-term care insurance, so we had to put her into a nursing home, and when she went into the nursing home, he went once a week, and she had to come out to see him. So, I I understood what made me realize that, and this is a whole different podcast about caretaking. And what made me realize that I wasn't a good caretaker was watching dad, because my father was such a good guy. He did what he had to do because this woman had followed him. We if you read my bio, you know, we lived all over the world, and it was because of dad's job, and, you know, it's oil exploration. We didn't get commissary privileges or embassy or any of that. But mom, that Pan Am flight attendant, you know, she'd pack up the house, pack up the 3 kids, and off we'd go. So, you know, his payback was he was gonna take care of her. I mean, you know, he loved her for who she had been. No one, you know, once they're in dementia, it's much more difficult.
Sure. Yeah, to connect, yeah.
Yeah. So I was proud of my father for finding his own life once he knew she was taken care of. You know, we all say, "Oh no, we don't want to go into a home. We don't want to have this happen. We don't want to have that happen." Well, sure you do. I mean, you know, if someone else can take better care, why aren't you putting them there? You know, you're being selfish. You're listening to people who don't need, who think that that is your job, and that's wrong. My husband now in rehab, I mean, he's learning how to use a walker, he's learning how to use a cane. Now, he has Alzheimer's, so who knows how long that'll last, but nevertheless, I mean, now we're gonna be able to put him into an assisted living center if he's good enough, but you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And his care is gonna be much better. I couldn't even lift him off the floor every time he fell. So,
How did you navigate that transition from long-term care insurance running out and then going into a nursing facility?
well, it was the hardest day of my life. Imagine,
About that.
imagine. Between my brother and I, we used 2, you know, maybe 3 by 3, maybe 3 by 4 boxes to transfer all that mom needed into her nursing home. It was a day trip. She, you know, she adjusted about as well as anyone could. I had such guilt. I could not believe that between my brother and I, we could not afford a memory care unit. But now I'm really glad we couldn't, because I'm not a big fan of memory care units.
Let me ask you about that, and I hope you don't mind. I get very technical on the pragmatic part of this because I think that's what can be helpful for people. So when you looked at memory care, I'm assuming this was in Georgia or Florida, right?
Mm,
How much
yeah,
or sorry,
6,000. 6,000 a month.
6,000 a month?
Mhm.
Okay. And
And
then
we were paying,
do what?
you know, we were dad was already in an assisted living facility, and they had a memory care unit, so in a way it would have been nice, but who has $12,000 a year?
And so the memory care was 6,000 a month or 6,000 a year?
A month.
A month, right, okay. And then so when she ran out of that funding, did she go to Medicaid or
Uh-huh.
did she have her
I
long-term coverage?
No, I put her into Medicaid.
Medicaid, okay. And I asked that because I think a lot of people just get a lot of confusion about what's covered and what's not covered and Medicare versus Medicaid, and we've talked a bit on the podcast how Medicare might cover, you know, the 100 days of rehab, in a skilled nursing facility, but talking about the funding for longer term placement and long-term care in a nursing facility, now you're talking about either self-pay or Medicaid.
$12,000 a year. I
Wow.
mean, a month, pardon me,
A month.
$12,000 a month. Yeah,
Right.
self-pay, anywhere from 10 to 12. That's why I
Right.
do Medicaid planning, and that's what we charge. I charge $10,000. Some people charge more, 12,000. But that's because we're saving you that money down the road.
Right. Right. And so you said she adjusted okay. What was his life like after that transition? Did he pick up a new hobby or what? How did he fill his time now that he wasn't doing caregiving?
He would go the nursing home, the assisted living, they had the they had a bunch of World War II vets, and they'd go out to lunch together. I would come in once a month from Miami and spend 2 or 3 days there going, from one place to the other, and we usually Matt and I would take him out to dinner. I'd take him shopping if he needed to go shopping. He and I would go to lunch. They had all sorts of different things you could do. We recorded him at that museum they have there for the Smithsonian about about what he did in World War II. So, they kept him pretty busy, but he was quite happy playing solitaire on his iPad and, you know, watching some TV, checking his emails. I knew my father was on his way out when he quit using his iPad. And it was purely failure to thrive in my father's case.
Right.
Purely failure to thrive. But he waited until mother died. And then 4 months later, he was gone. But I knew that would happen. There was no way I could keep him alive.
Well, I'm fascinated by your story, and I know you've got an impressive translation of life experience to like your occupation and how you do this. And I'm wondering if you were walking down the street and somebody came up to you and said, "Oh, I just realized my mother has dementia, my father has some health issues. I don't even know where to start." And you were just going to shake them. You were going to put your arms around their shoulders and kind of say, like, these are the three most important things for you to know right now. What would you talk about?
First of all, whoever has dementia, you have to address it now. The first thing I'd say is here's how I do it. How much are you worth? Because even if your assets are like $1 million or 1.5, there's an excellent chance you're going to end up in Medicaid because it's $6,000 to $7,000 a month for assisted living and $6,000 to $7,000 a month. Now, there are cheaper places. And I'm not talking. Look, the best place, the place that everybody says, "Oh my God, this is the best place," is only okay.
Right. I know.
It's only okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, so that's the first thing. So the first thing I'd say to them is, "All right, well, how much are you worth?" Because if you can have round the clock help, that's fine. But if your mother also has health issues, they're only going to be exacerbated by being the caretaker. So you have to take him out of her her circle. You have to put him somewhere. And look, there are all sorts of assisted living places. Some are smaller, some are bigger. So number one is what you're worth. Number two, are your parents prepared to be separated? Have you talked to them about this? I mean, I mean, it is so difficult for people to understand dementia. They don't remember. It doesn't matter whether you raise your voice, whether you lower your voice, it doesn't matter. Before my husband left, we live in a condo. I could not tell him to go down to the garage in the elevator and do this or that because by the time he got downstairs, he had forgotten. I mean, how how often do I have to tell you? And it's so difficult. It's a minute to minute existence, and it's so hard to tell people that. The other thing is, all right, so one is money. Two is, are they ready to be separated? Because if your mom has health issues, we have to deal with those very separately than your father's dementia. So that's one and two. And then three, what can I do? Here's what I do. What can I do?
How do you I imagine in your course of dealing with this professionally that you have adult children that maybe don't feel as positive as you did about your parents. It sounds like you really liked your parents or admired them and loved them.
Mhm.
And we've had a lot of people on the podcast intentionally to come talk about what if that wasn't their experience? What if this is, biologically their parent, but they feel resentment or they felt abuse or something that sort of makes that exchange even more challenging, whether you're talking about how much time or money or attention I'm going to spend for one or both of the parents when there has been a strained relationship leading up to that. Do you have any anecdotes about that?
Yeah, mom and I.
Oh,
Yeah, I I came out of the womb at 5'7" and grew to 5'10". Mother was 5'2". I was a little bit more like my dad, sort of an endomorph. I mean, not that there was probably a time when I had a little too much weight on my body, but mom battled weight constantly. And she had no self-esteem. So, as a consequence, when you're a mother and you have no self esteem, there's two things that happen. First of all, your kids are raised that way, right? Because it's all about what have you done for me lately? You know what I'm saying? It's like, if you love me, you would. If you love me, you would. If you love me, you would. And so the good news for me is in my first marriage, which lasted all of 3 years, I am a late bloomer. I became anorexic. I'm now 140 pounds. I went down to about 112, 116. And that led me into therapy, which was a 2-year journey. But that 2-year journey got me into law school. So, I mean, the bad news for me now is I have to learn a little humility, right? I mean, once you learn to appreciate who you are and what you have to remember, okay, not everybody has that. So when mom was down and out for the count, I had to give it up. I mean, it's like, you know what, Francis? Enough. At a minimum, she gave you life and you've had a pretty good one. So why don't you, young lady, just turn around and do what you can for her?
what were your reservations? Like, what was coming up for you that seemed
Well,
like
I
it
mean, it
was
was the resentment. It was the constant. I mean, I can't even tell you some of my achievements that have nothing to do with Boomers Booming, my book, or law school. She actually flew to Miami to talk me out of going to law school because I wasn't married. I mean, that's the kind of person she was. She felt like, marriage solved everything. I mean, hello, not that there's anything wrong with marriage. I'm not disparaging it, but I wanted my own life. I never wanted to depend on anyone else. So, but I mean, that's who she was. It wasn't like, you know, now they did come to law school graduation, but it was like, well, really. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it was constant. It didn't matter what I did. Yet in the end, I was their salvation. But it's not like now, was my father every time I saw him, he thanked me constantly. Honey, are you sure you can come up here this much? Are you sure I can't thank you enough for doing what you're doing. It was constant with him. But then I just realized at first, it was gonna make dad happy if mom and I were one, and number 2, I mean, when she died, I was so happy. There was no guilt whatsoever. I had done everything I could for her, and whether or not she cared, didn't matter to me. I'm the one who has to live with it, not her. So if you're estranged from your parents, if they beat you, why are you even talking to them? I mean, it's like you have to move on from that because that's an unhealthy thing. But if you're just estranged because of like mom and I, well, get over it. You're a big girl now. And at a minimum, she gave you life. And if that's not how you feel, don't put yourself out. You know? I mean, the bad news is, and this drives me nuts, the bad news is kids go into foster care, which we all know isn't such a great thing, all right? But nevertheless, at least they get a family. Adults go into like the worst nursing home there is because the state's paying for it. You, you know what I'm saying? If you're found wandering on the streets and you don't have any identification, and I have found twice in my life, I have found old folks wandering the streets with dementia. And in both cases, thank God, the children had left something in the purse they carried so that you could call the person. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
So what did it sounds like you learned so much, I guess, fairly early in this. I mean, did you specialize into elder care immediately after law school, or is that something that came later?
no, I was a litigator, and then I went into politics.
Oh, okay. So you
Yeah,
yeah, you've come around to that then,
yeah. No, that's what I've done for probably the last 9 or 10 years. Well,
nice.
let's see, mom and dad died in 2017, so it's been 10 years. Yeah, it's been 10 years because I started maybe 2014, but I sort of consider 2015 when I started realizing, wow, there is no one to help these people. I mean, even that explanation of benefits at EOB, you open it up and it says, "This is not a bill." If you're 90 years old, you're like, "Well, then what is it?"
Right, right. Where is the bill? Why isn't the bill with
What
missing?
does that mean? Do I owe something? You know? And they can't take care of their finances. I mean, dad, I mean, the minute I started taking care of his finances, he was freed. Free, free, free at last, you know? And even, my husband, that's its own story, which is also in my book, but my husband he and I had a prenup. I was his second wife, and he was a very successful person and sold the business for quite a bit of money. And then he spent it all because we had this prenuptial. His was his and mine was mine, and he paid me. He covered all my expenses, and then I got so many dollars for being with him so many years, et cetera, et cetera. But between the ages of 70 and 80, he just spent all his money, just didn't bother to tell me. And then, because of the dementia and the fact that I didn't notice it right away, right? He quit paying his bills.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So so I'm telling you, I mean, and look, was I really angry when all this came about? Of course I was. But thank God I'm a lawyer. I mean, it's like, okay, I am confident there are experiences I haven't had yet, but I've had a lot of them to date. And now I'm happy about it because I can talk to you about it, not as someone who has read about it or written about it by researching, but by someone who has experienced it.
I'm
So,
wondering, and I do you have any, children of your own or nieces or nephews?
nieces and
Uh,
nephews,
and
yeah,
do
but
you have any, like, going what you went through, like, do you have some expectation of how your, I guess, brother or sister would be treated or managed by the nieces and nephews?
I think my brother, because of the way, if you're an example then that's what's going to happen. And so Matt was good to his mother and he was good to his father. And so I'm confident he has 3 kids, and I'm confident all 3 will join in to take care of their parents. My oldest nephew, who is also my power of attorney, my oldest nephew is taking care of his grandmother. They call her Mimi, and he is, oh my gosh, he he I rarely say the wife is lucky, but in this case, Jeff is so good about taking care of his grandmother. He's gonna be s and he's a great dad, and, as a consequence, I mean, I think he's a good husband, but, I'm not the wife here. I only see what they let me see. Do you understand what I'm saying? But
Right. Yeah.
I know, and he goes to visit her at least once a month, takes one of his daughters normally, and, I mean, they seem and of course, my niece has 5 children of her own, 5, count them, 5
Wow.
children, only because they had 3 girls, they wanted a son really badly, so they got pregnant again, they got the son, but he came with a sister. So 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 that's what happens. So, right now she's dealing with that, and but my brother's in his 60s still, he and his wife both, so I think they're gonna be fine, and then their youngest is a good man, but he's the baby, so I'm not real, I don't know yet.
Well, that yeah, that I
My
think it's
sister's
important.
kids won't take care of her.
Why do you say that?
No, the oldest one, who's a girl, won't. And the youngest one, who's a boy and in his 30s, still lives with his mother. So I'm assuming he pays rent, but I know for a long time he didn't. But I think she's gonna have a hard road to hoe, but not my brother.
Right, right. That's interesting because even within one family, you can see that variability. It's not a
Mhm.
guaranteed either direction, There's just a lot of variables inside of that, and it's just sometimes hard to predict and I've seen it go both ways where you think that family's gonna come together and be really supportive and they just kind of fall apart or crumble when that time comes, or you think, wow, that family isn't gonna be able to pull it together, and man, they show up and full force. And so even kind of as it unfolds, it's not exactly clear, especially if these situations last longer than, there's a crisis time period where everybody can be really helpful, but sometimes months turn into years, turn into decades, and
I
that can be
think
really
it's
challenging. And healthcare has gotten really good at extending people's lives, but we
which
haven't quite gotten the greatest at extending the quality of life and experiences and connection. And so
that's my
somebody
next project. I wanna pass a law that says that today, Frances Reeves, because she's of sound mind and sound body, can sign a document that says, if I don't recognize people, if I am bedbound and never get out of bed, if I am drooling at the mouth, if I'm in hospice for over a year, I want you to kill me. I think we should be able to do that. I don't think it's right. The only people who are, I mean, it's gaming the system, really. They're keeping them alive so that they can charge them. I
But
mean,
it's
I,
funny because I've had that thought so many times of like, I could buy into long-term care, or I could make sure that I write this document that my husband has all of the authority to take me to whatever state or country would be required, because of course I live in this space, right? And I call it fate's worse than death, and we can have a whole other conversation about that. And that's for me, not saying this is for everybody, but for my own self. If I can't connect and be aware and meaningfully participate in the lives of people I care about, then I've got other things to do that are maybe not on this earth, and so I don't need to be kept in that condition on this earth longer than I would have to be. So it's funny, it's like I mean, that is antithetical to most kind of American type thinking. I know it's not in some European countries, but yeah, so if you pass that law, I'll vote for your law.
yeah, I mean, We have just got to get it together. And I publish in 2 newspapers here in Miami, and I wrote an article on that caretaking was a choice, not a sentence. Just because you're married to someone doesn't mean you have to take care of them, period. You have a life to live, and you only have one life. So, unless you're Hindu, but then you might come back as a cockroach. But so you have to live it. And I feel very strongly about that. I do not want to. My husband was totally incontinent before I got him out of this house. Every day I had to check the sheets to see if they had to be washed or not. I mean, and I'm working a minimum of 40 hours a week. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
A lot of people expect you to. There's this expectation that, the good wife, well, I'm not the good wife. I'm good to myself. I have found him a good place to be. I've put things in motion, so he's going to be taken care of as well as he can be taken care of. And look, it's not easy. There's not some guilt that doesn't happen, but I want to get us both to a place where the guilt is less. Because he doesn't remember. In other words, when I go tomorrow, he's not going to remember that I wasn't there today.
Yeah, and I really, I really value that perspective, and I think that perspective is hard sometimes to process, and when there's a very loud component of drop everything, do everything at all costs, and I talk a lot on the podcast about zero-sum games, like, there's only so much time and attention,
Right.
and then this kind of fantasy world where you can raise your kids and help your parents and somehow not shorten your own lifespan in the process is I consider myself a pragmatist, and it's just not, always doable. And I think some of it's the open conversations with your spouse. I mean, I tell my spouse all the time, like, I don't expect you to stop your life. I want you to be with the kids or the grandkids or hopefully the great grandkids. And,
Right. Right, right, right.
this is not, anyway. But but again, then I have the same discussion with my dad, and he's like, I'll never forgive you if you put me in a nursing home.
Oh, I know.
And I'm
Everybody.
like, well, I don't hopefully it doesn't come to that, Dad, but that's not something you can say without, having unlimited resources. And even
Exactly.
people with unlimited resources are like, "Well, I have a nest egg or I have this." I said, "Not for long. Do you know how much 24-hour care costs?"
Yeah.
There are
No.
very few people that can afford that, ad infinitum.
Take out a second mortgage on their house.
Right.
'Cause they live alone. That's why long-term care is so important to me, because I know I will be living alone, and so I need that. Whether I stay in my apartment or it pays for an assisted living facility. At least I have it.
Right.
Elder care, it costs a lot of money. And also people get very caught up in this 3 weeks for Medicare with rehab, because what people forget is the next 90 days or 120 days, I'd have to look at the statute, it's 80% is covered by Medicare, a
Right.
and 20% is private. So, it's not like, "Okay, they need a 4th week. Oh, we can't afford it." "Oh, yes, you can." And maybe what he needs is Medicaid. Maybe what he needs is a community waiver. Maybe what he or she needs is, there are so many options, and they just hear like, "Oh, you can only be there for 3 weeks for Medicare to pay for it." Well, for Medicare to pay 100% of it, you're absolutely right. But for week 4 and 5, Medicaid can pick it up. You just simply
Right.
have to apply for it,
Or their secondary insurance, the people
or
that
their
only
secondary insurance.
carrying
Yeah.
a secondary. So I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. I bet we could have like 4 or 5 other podcasts. So I think I'd love to talk to you more about like Medicaid specifically. And then I know you can talk more about adult relationships as well as something we haven't covered on the podcast. Like, what if your parents have another relationship or, somebody dies or, goes into a facility and then they start up a new relationship and how to navigate that. So that's another
I'm
topic I feel like.
hoping That's what happens with my husband. That he goes into an assisted living center and he finds some lovely little lady who wants to take care of him, because she also lives in the assisted living center. This happens all the time. Don't get me wrong, he'll be happy to see me when I come. She might not be, but, I'm gonna buy her birthday and Christmas gifts too.
You already have this thought out.
Well, you know who really had it thought out was Warren Buffett's wife.
Yeah.
Nobody knows about Warren Buffett's wife, but they got married out of college, and he made her move to Nebraska. She was a California girl, and when she'd raised the 3 kids, of course, Warren has unlimited resources, as we all know, and they purchased a place in San Francisco where she liked, and so she lived most of her time in San Francisco. And so what she did was she found a good friend of hers who didn't have as many resources as they did, but it was more a friend of hers. And so she called her and said, why don't you call Warren and ask him to dinner and get him out a little bit, blah, blah, blah. And now she died first, as we all know. She had breast cancer, but she would send out the Christmas card with all 3 of them because the other woman had, in fact, taken her place, and she was thrilled. She was kind of done with Warren, but imagine the divorce. You know what I'm saying? And why divorce? And to this day, Warren Buffett calls her his hero because she navigated it. She navigated it so they both had a good life. And, she did everything she was asked to do. She could have filed for divorce, but why? Instead, she found him and he married that lady about 5 years after her death.
I did
So,
not know that story.
yeah, and look, Sandra Day O'Connor, she until her I mean, she just died in 2024, but until her husband died, she went off the bench because of his dementia, and so he was in a nice, uh, a lovely place and still played golf and all that stuff, and found a girlfriend there, and, poor Justice O'Connor, it's all over the news. I mean, these are 2 80-plus-year-olds holding hands on the golf course, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But
Nevertheless, she just kind of said, "I'm happy for him," and and sent out a Christmas card with all 3 of them on it. I mean, it's sort of the adult thing to do. Now, I don't send out Christmas cards, so I won't be doing that, but I want it's like people restricting Tom from drinking. Tom loves alcohol. So tomorrow morning when I go see him, I'm gonna take him a Bloody Mary. Now, do I water down the vodka? Of course I do. It's just a little bit, as I do his whiskey. Well, I mean, now he's not here anymore, but prior to that. But, I mean, we have all these mores that we're trying to put on people, and we have no idea what their existence is like. I mean, if there's a woman in that place that's with him all the time, of course he's gonna choose that, and I'm thrilled. I'm not gonna divorce Tom because A, it's way too expensive. B, what do I get? The prenup doesn't hold anymore, he has no money. You know what I'm saying? I want my own life. That's
yeah.
all.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I love that we can get into some issues that just don't get talked about a lot in these circles. And I even think amongst close friends, it's like nobody wants to talk about their parents or or what's going on. So I appreciate you being candid and open. And I think that that helps people. So I'm wondering, you mentioned a couple of projects that you've been working on in your recent book. If people wanted to connect with you or learn more about, what you've got going on or read the book, where would they find that? What would they do next?
Well, the book is Boomers Booming: How to Thrive After 65 and Have Good Sex. So, and there's a whole chapter on sex because old people have more time for it.
Will you come back and we can do a podcast specifically on that?
I'm happy to do a podcast specifically on that. Now, my book is what it really is motivational. You have to live your life, and that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book is but you have to plan your life. If you don't have your estate in order, just like my husband, look what's happened. I mean, the good news for him is he's married to a lawyer. Just like mom and dad, they would have been down and out for the count. So you have to plan your life. And I tell you how to do that. It starts in chapter 11. And I even say just put a little sticky there. And it's available on Amazon.com. And it's also available on my website. And that's where you can reach me. It's parentyourparents.com. Very easy. Just because I think unless your parents beat you or starved you or some of these horrible horror stories that we hear, let them beg forgiveness.
And so you have on the website some practical tools, I'm assuming, for people that want to,
I do.
yeah, move forward. And then as far as if they wanted to find you as an attorney, is that the same website or is it a
Same
different website?
website. Yeah.
Oh, same website. Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
all in one place.
I'm H. Frances Reeves, Esquire, PLLC, DBA, doing business as Parent Your Parents, because I
Oh,
want
wow.
both out there. And my Parent Your Parents, I call it a little business because what I do within that is, if you need caretaking, I'm not a caretaking place, but because of my experience over the past 10 years, I know a lot of caretakers who are independent and you can make better deals with them. Or if you
Yeah.
need help moving, I have movers who will help you. I have a move manager who will help you.
Oh, wow.
If the family is fighting, Rhonda Fuchs, boom, in she'll go. And if you don't like this one particular doctor or that type of thing, I have a doctor who'll read those medical records and tell you, yes, they're right. No, they're wrong. And
So
if
you
you need,
built like an ecosystem or a network.
that's what Parent Your Parents is, where, I contract with these people to take my folks, and most of them take Medicare anyway. Even if you need, look, through this whole thing with Tom, I needed a therapist for the first time in a long, long time. And it was my primary care provider who said, you might need a therapist. So, yeah, I'm here to tell you, it is not an easy journey, and I'm a pretty strong woman.
Well,
So
yeah, it sounds like we have a small laundry list here of things that we need to revisit in a future podcast. So I appreciate that. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing with our audience here. I know they listen for stories and for tips and for
I have
anecdotes.
lots of them.
I know. Yeah. So I really appreciate you being here and I hope that you'll come back and join us again soon.
Rebecca, I appreciate this podcast. The fact that you are actually talking about things people don't want to talk about. And with your background, there's nobody better, a rehab doctor. You have to know, those people coming in and what they need and how hard it is in some cases to get them better. So I applaud you because I know you do this on your own time, just like I do.
I appreciate it. Thank you for saying that. And I will be in touch to get you back on these other fun topics.
Okay. All right, Rebecca.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to take just a moment to review the disclaimer. This podcast is for informational and occasional entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed here is formal medical, legal, or financial advice. By listening to the podcast, we are not creating a patient-doctor relationship between you and myself or any of the guests. Really, it's just me and a possible guest or two, sometimes three, sitting around talking about difficult topics related to aging parents. If you have or suspect that you might have a medical problem or condition, You should seek advice from a licensed medical professional. If you have any questions or concerns, please read the full disclaimer in the show notes or contact me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good day.